Hello and welcome to our Keystone HR Forum. We're excited to have you all join us today. Our topic is challenging the status quo about pay equity. I also want to recognize and celebrate today as International Women's Day. As you can imagine, there was some thought there in timing of the topic and our panelists today. But as we explored and prepared for the discussion, we realized it was a much broader topic than just gender. And so we're going to have some information regarding attracting and retaining talent as well. I'm Myra Wilkins. I'm the SVP for the Central Region at Keystone Partners. For those of you that are just joining us for the first time, the goal of our HR Forum program is typically to bring together our HR professionals to learn about, the current challenges and issues that we're all facing in the industry. And so we're excited about today's topic and this terrific group of panelists that we've assembled for our topic today on pay equity. The way we've designed today's forum is the first half is really going to be these fantastic panelists sharing some of their best practices and their experience. And then the second half is going to really open it up for some questions as well as some dialogue. So I am excited to introduce you to this terrific list of panelists that you see assembled here. We're going to start with Ruth, who joins us actually today from London and from Payscale. She's going to be sharing some exciting and new information on data. Linda, who joins us from Capital One. She's going to speak to you about ambassadorship and performance reviews. Pete joins us from Sage Therapeutics. He'll speak to pay equity and the hyper-competitive market. Mim is going to talk about small and large group businesses, and she joins us from Hub International. And then Kim is going to round us out. She joins us from American Airlines, and we'll be talking about the Fair Pay Workplace Certification. So let's get started. Ruth, why don't you kick us off with some interesting new data from Payscale?
Great, thanks, Myra, and thank you very much for having me here on International Women's Day. It's great to be talking about pay equity today. So my role at Payscale is appropriately pay equity strategist. So we're focusing on how we can evolve our products and our solutions and our research to support our customers on their fair pay journey. And so today, to kick us off, I thought it would be useful to share some of the most recent data from our research that focuses on pay equity and what the gender pay gap looks like. So I thought I'd start with our compensation best practice report. So that's where we actually survey reward and HR practitioners and business leaders. It's one of the biggest surveys of its kind from a compensation practice perspective, with over 5,500 survey participants. And we dug deep into pay equity this year. I joined in time to extend the number of questions that were included in that survey. And what we have seen, not surprisingly, is a huge uptick in intent to do something about pay equity in organizations this year. So we recorded 66% of organizations were planning to do some form of pay equity initiative this year, which was a huge jump. That was 20% jump on last year. And I think, we're going to talk more today about the reasons why, people are planning to take more action this year. For me, what was most encouraging was really understanding why people were planning to do this. And what we saw was really a shift towards a more value-led perspective, where the reasons why people were wanting to take action on pay equity is because they saw it as an important part of their overall company value proposition and part of a proactive talent strategy. So previously we had another option, which was, we were doing pay equity analysis or pay equity initiatives because this was, from a compliance and risk perspective. Now we see this shift where pay equity is being seen much more as a strategic action and a strategic business initiative. The other interesting observation from that report was really around how people are starting to think about pay equity as a more sustainable exercise. So I think we all understand that, if you're doing pay equity analysis, this is not something that's kind of a one and done exercise. And for those organizations that were actually doing pay equity analysis, 41% of them are either doing it continuously or at least doing it annually. And I think, again, we're going to talk more today about how the practitioners here are making pay equity part of their everyday compensation best practices. And then just to finish, the other survey that we do is more of an employee-based survey. So we survey the 6 million employees who put their data into our crowdsourced platform. And that's our gender pay gap report. And that will actually be coming out, the updated version, on US Equal Pay Day, a week today. But what we did see in that is, from an uncontrolled basis, the gender pay gap, which stood at 82 cents for every $1 from a female perspective, from a gender perspective, 82 cents for every dollar that a man earned. That hasn't changed. And I think, again, we're probably aware of many of the reasons and many of the issues that have arisen during the post-pandemic and post-pandemic, why that may be. And what is interesting to observe is, although that 82-cent figure is the overall figure over a woman's career, we also look and we capture data across the woman's career life cycle, and we can see that isn't a consistent experience across that cycle. So, for example, the older women get, the further their earning power declines, and we saw the gender pay gap in the women over 45 category turn out at 73 cents on the dollar compared to the overall 82 cents. We see women who return to the workforce after a period of unemployment experience larger pay gaps than men, and that motherhood penalty that I'm sure many of you will be aware of. Women who are parents experience a larger pay gap than men who are parents. So that's a 74 cents on the dollar. So it's really interesting to see how those different pay gaps play out across the cycle. We also look at race and gender and how they intersect as part of that study. And, at those different points that I've discussed, we see consistently wider pay gaps in women of color. And that hasn't changed as well. So that was really just some of the data I wanted to kick us off with today.
Thank you. That was fantastic, Ruth. And I know that the team is going to be including some of that information as they talk about some of their best practices as well, but we'll definitely come back to more information from you, Ruth. But let's turn it over to Linda, who's going to talk to us from Capital One.
Thank you, Myra, and thank you, Ruth. Very, very interesting information. It is really a pleasure to be here. And I would start by saying I very recently joined Capital One. I have 6 months with them. And I'm enjoying each of those 6 months. I am in love with the organization, and I wanted to share one of the reasons why I find it peculiar and very advanced in the diversity, inclusion, and belonging space. On top of all of the compliance things that we all need to do, I found a particular practice an interesting one, because it's taking the conversation around dealing with potential biases, getting a higher understanding of what those biases could be and how they actually impact the outcomes of all of the performance management processes and talent management processes. And so that practice here is known as belonging ambassadors. This is a particular group of people that have been trained to be part of those conversations whenever we are talking about performance management, whenever we're making calibrations, try to understand your talent, my talent, and how they compare against each other. There is a person right there that is, in addition to any facilitator that might be there from a talent management perspective or an HR perspective. This is any of us that could be representing a particular function, particular business, not necessarily an HR professional, definitely not necessarily a diversity professional, but is someone that is has a personal interest on the conversation. So that's one of the beautiful things that I found. You need to be willing to volunteer, and you would want to have a voice in the conversation. And through that, you will be, if you're an ambassador in this processes, you would be bringing up questions, flagging potential biases, making sure that every voice, even in the room, it's heard, because sometimes we have people that could have fantastic skills to communicate and sell their talent. Others might not have the same level of skill. And even that simple fact could introduce additional biases. And so this is a very interesting practice that has been in place for a while. And in my experience so far, I've only been in one of those cycles, but it actually works. And the thing that I like the most about is that it's coming from a person that has an interest on that. So that makes it very, very genuine. But at the same time, you have some, you actually need to be certified, because what you don't want to do is introduce another voice in the conversation that is not necessarily trained to in the way that you would respectfully raise some of the questions or even challenge very openly. That sounds like it could be a bias, or there could be some misunderstanding in the way that you're saying it, in the way that I am perceiving it. So that is one of the practices that I wanted to share today. And that is definitely taking things beyond what compliance could give us. And when you look at the results, it actually, you can see it. Because of course we review and measure all of the outcomes at the end of the day, and they have observed in the past a significant improvement in the way that those outcomes are equitable and reflect a better and more inclusive process. So that is what I wanted to share today.
Linda, could you just expand a little bit more though? Is the ambassador there for the individual that's having the performance review, or the leader that's conducting the review?
It's for the leader. And most of the time, the ambassador could play a dual role. The ambassador would be in the broader conversations whenever you're discussing or featuring talent in a group of people leaders, because you might be calibrating, or you might be trying to identify what are the skills that you want to recognize further, and you will have discussions as well as around performance. And so they end up being a resource for the people leader to even catch ourselves. We might not know that we may have a bias, but in the way that we're expressing things, or in the way that we're evaluating other people that are trained to better catch them, can see them, even if we can't.
That's fantastic. And I know that the entire panelist was very enthusiastic about this best practice. And during the dialogue, we'll come back and revisit some of the highlights of how they received it. So thank you, Linda, so much for that.
Sure.
Let's turn now to Pete, who's going to share some information for us regarding pay equity in hyper-competitive market. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yep, I was. Thank you, Myra. I also want to, it's really an honor to be on the panel today. And I really commend and give kudos to Keystone for getting us together today. So it's really a great subject. Unlike all these very prestigious firms that are here that you all probably recognize and know, I guess before I launch into my conversation, I just want to give you a quick snippet about Sage Therapeutics. So Sage is a biopharmaceutical company, and we have a mission to fearlessly lead the way to create a world with better brain health. So we're a company that has the first FDA-approved drug on the market to treat postpartum depression. And we got a robust pipeline of new drugs moving through to treat major depressive disorders and many other diseases of the brain. So our company is in this biopharma market. We're here with 500 employees across the country. Our headquarters is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it's one of the places that is probably the hottest job market within our industry. We have recently announced that we have a full Sage Flex program, which means that all of our employees can work wherever they want, remotely full-time, or they can come in the office as often as they like. So it's really an opportunity for people to really to work as effectively as they can wherever it makes the most sense for them. What we do on a regular basis for pay equity is we conduct very extensive market analysis, market pricing, job pricing, to understand where our jobs are against the market, what's competitive. We also take in information during the recruiting process to make sure we have real-time tabs on what's happening in the market. During our annual compensation planning process and during our promotion process during the year, we do a review of gender equity. We do a review of our pay equity when it comes to ethnicity and race. So we're very much conscious of reviewing and monitoring and dealing with anything that might come up that we feel is problematic. What's happening to us now, and I should also add that periodically, maybe every 3 to 4 years, we'll do a really deep dive statistical analysis of pay equity. And we'll bring an outside firm, a statistical expert, to come in and do an analysis for us, not only on those areas that I just mentioned, but also on age, on performance, looking at all the different dimensions, if you will, for pay and what's driving pay and being equitable across the board. Our challenge today is that we're hiring 250 people. Okay, we're basically hiring 50% of our workforce here in 2022, and we're in this hyper hot job market. As an example to underscore that, we're adding about 40,000 new jobs in the Boston area in the biopharma industry over the years 2021 through 2024. That's about a 50% increase in the number of new jobs in the area. So it's really crazy in terms of this hyperinflation that we're experiencing with pay and also with promotions. And it's across the board. So there's just not enough skilled workers to meet the demand. I've had more than one former employee that has been gone for about a year, and they've said that they're willing to come back, okay, at a position 2 levels higher than they had when they were here a year ago at 50% more pay. So it's unbelievable the kinds of pressures that we're seeing, and these are really good people who would love to bring back, but it creates the obvious internal equity and compression issues with that. So we're stretching the boundaries when it comes to internal pay equity to hire new folks and to make sure that we can meet the business demand, right? We've also, because of this stage flex policy that we have, we've got geographic mobility happening, right? As people move around the country and decide to work remotely wherever they want to work from, we've got people moving from high cost areas to low cost, from low cost to high cost. So that's creating additional interesting equity challenges for us. But anyways, some of the ways that we're dealing with this. So one of the things we've done is that we've purposely set up a larger promotion adjustment budget for salary increases during the year to deal with what we expect is going to be internal compression issues, right? And so that's been a very deliberate effort on leadership's part to make sure we have the funding that we need to really, keep up. We've also added a few new levels in our job structure. For example, and we didn't have a real extensive job structure with many, many levels, but we've added a few additional ones, for example, executive director, senior manager, so that we can create some opportunities to recognize some additional levels of responsibility that people are taking on, and we can actually recognize that with a promotion. And then the other thing that we're doing is we're committed to, as in the hiring process, as we bring people in, we have our talent acquisition team, on the alert when they see that there may be a compression issue getting created and we're stretching boundaries. Okay, we go back and we do an analysis of the team to make sure that if there are some, inequities being created, that we deal with them real time and we make adjustments on the spot. And so one last thing that we're doing is to keep up with all of this. We've hired a consultant, a comp consultant part-time to help us with the analysis we need to do on a real-time basis just to keep up. So it's a big challenge, but those are some of the things that we're doing to try to keep up with the pace. I'll also just make a note, because I know that it was a question that was asked prior to the meeting. But here in Massachusetts, we have the Mass Equal Pay Act, which is a pay act that protects around gender, pay inequities around gender. And one of the key elements of that law is that you cannot ask a prospective hire what they're currently earning, right? So it levels the playing field. So if men obviously are being paid more, there's no way to detect, or to be able to understand what someone's making. And as a result, it's been, I think, very positive in terms of from a pay equity perspective. I can see that it's definitely having an impact on pay equity, gender pay equity, but it also creates an additional inflationary, component to the negotiating process, right? Employees, whether they're male or female, are putting in what they expect to earn, right? What they are willing to consider to move. And that's a number higher than, in the past, we would have been asking what we were making. And then that would have been something that would have been a factor in the process. That's not the case anymore. We can't do that. And there's some other states, obviously, that have enacted similar laws. I think it's been a real positive thing for gender pay equity, but it's also, obviously attributing to some of the inflation in a good way.
Pete, we do have a follow-up question for you that came through in our Q&A, and it talks about the equity analysis that you're doing regularly for your compensation cycles. Are you doing that in-house, you said, I think, or externally? And if it's in-house, do you use any particular software tool that you're using to help with that equity analysis?
Yes, no, there's some software out there. We do not use the software tool. We do it the old-fashioned way internally. And so that's something, again, we have 500 employees, and we feel like we're not big enough yet to really need to really apply the software that's out there. But it's a process by reviewing, again, comparing the different groups and where they're at, whether it be the percent increase of a salary review, the bonus percent, goal attainment percent, percent of equity target given, comparing, again, these groups to make sure that we've got parity. But we're not using the software yet.
Are any of the other panelists using any kind of software that they would recommend to answer to this question? It's out there.
American Airlines we're using Syndio as our pay equity review tool.
Terrific. Great. Well, Pete, that was outstanding. Thank you. I know we have some follow-up questions. We'll be coming back to you during the Q&A, but let's turn it over now to Mim, who's going to talk to us from Hub International.
Thanks, Myra. Pete, that was fantastic. What great stuff you guys are doing at Sage, for sure. It'll definitely help. We need to get that word out there for you to help the recruiting cycle. So as Myra said, I'm from Hub International, but my small and large business point of view is fueled by the Boston Women's Workforce Council, which is the council that I'm on. If you're not from the area, the Boston Women's Workforce Council is a public-private partnership that is dedicated to eliminating the gender and racial wage gap. My company, Hub International, is a compact signer, so we actually participate in this initiative, which means we give our compensation data into BU, is our data scientist organization behind the Boston Women's Workforce Council. They anonymize the data, which is a word I practiced 35 times doing. I was going to say it to you guys because I couldn't get it right before. Yeah, thanks so much, Kim. So they take the data in and make it so that we can share results across the platform, but it's protecting all of us. And so that raw data in a most recent survey, 2021, showed that it had not changed from 2019. Women at a raw gap were 30 cents on the dollar in the greater Boston area. If you were Black or African American or Hispanic, it's 51 and 55 cents. So just like kind of pointing out that the gap that we've got to take a look at. And then finally, I want to bring this up for you. Because this mechanism allows us to pull in performance compensation as well. You'll all shake your heads because you're all HR people and you get this. That gap is even bigger. That's like 69 cents. Hello, McFly. There's a caveat because not every job gets performance pay, which I totally get, but I just had to lay that one down there. So this group, in addition to collecting the data, we also put together best practices. So I thought I'd share what we're seeing these employers do to address this. And Pete just nailed a whole bunch of them. But clearly, assessment and accountability, right? Really, you can't manage what you're not measuring, which is like the tagline that we're all talking about here. So for some people, that's like Kim was saying, we're using software. Other people are hiring consultants to do that, but there's a whole constituency that you live and work with who doesn't have that vehicle, and they're literally, like Pete said, doing it on the back of an envelope, but it's important to do. There's also a lot of work on the compact signer groups around diversity and inclusion and making sure that we're looking at getting underrepresented women into the workplace and moving them up the ladder. Some work that I know the people on this call will know full well, implicit and explicit bias. I didn't practice explicit, obviously. Those habits and really peeling that apart. The best practices conference that we have with the Boston Women's Workforce Council is just a treasure trove of insight, people just openly sharing what's helping them get through the day in there. And also retaining people. What does it mean? I mean, this is a little, our house is on fire when it comes to retaining people. We're all like focused on this, but the idea of being able to create pathways that people understand and can see, and looking at the racial and gender gap in your company so you can address that. And finally, making sure there's equity and advancement. Those are the places, the different initiatives that were most recently shared by the compact signers. What you figure out intuitively for small and large group businesses is nothing you probably don't know as the chief HROs that you are in your companies, is that interventions are not one size fits all. If there was like some pill we could all be taking and this would be gone, our moms and grandmothers would have done it years ago. But perhaps collection of these interventions will give you the one or two things that are possible within your own company so that you can remove the barriers to wage equity just for the constituency that you're serving. And if we're all sort of rolling that Sisyphus rock up the hill, then we're leaving it better for the people behind us. So there's my advertisement for International Women's Day. Thanks.
Mim, that was fantastic. You always bring a ton of energy to these sessions. And I really enjoyed how you sort of summarized a combination of what Ruth has discussed already, and Pete, and then Linda as well, and some really good best practices. So thank you for that. All right, Kim, why don't you bring it home for us? And then we'll open it up for some great dialogue.
Absolutely. And thank you again for having me on this panel. It's a really exciting topic, and I think it's something that's near and dear to all of our hearts. And so it's just great to be able to get together on International Women's Day to talk about this. So I'm just going to share a little bit with you about our Fair Pay Workplace certification at American Airlines and kind of how we went about that. We signed the White House Equal Pay Pledge in 2016. And similar to what Peter mentioned, we went through this phase where we were doing the analysis in conjunction with kind of a third party that would review it, an external counsel. And it was very iterative, like, you know, many of you have probably already experienced, but after a few years, we said, we'd like to have a tool in our lap so we can tweak our methodology and develop it and kind of improve it in real time as we go and based on what we're seeing. So in 2019, we signed with Syndio, who does our, you know, they're our tool for our pay equity review. And they also sat down with us, and we took all of 2020 to really develop a robust methodology on how we wanted to review pay equity for our organization. So it was pandemic time well spent, right? When we were all sitting at home, wondering when the sky's going to fall. But American Airlines was reviewing pay equity and really trying to figure out how we can perfect our methodology and our model. So when we worked with Syndio, they had shared with us, hey, we're working with Fair Pay Workplace that has a certification in this space. And you'd be the first cohort. So we were signed, you know, we were certified with Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, NerdWallet, UC Irvine, a few other companies, but we were the first cohort to get certified. But what I really like about the Fair Pay Workplace certification was that they've got published rules and standards that anybody could go out on the website and review. And they require you to communicate what you're doing, right? In the fact that you're doing a pay equity review for your organization. But it kind of removes the hindrance and the worry that we all go through is they're going to ask questions about how do you do it and how do you do it for engineers versus administrative assistants and all this kind of detail that, you know, you really shouldn't be sharing. But that was the beauty of the certification, because they have published rules and standards that say we'll certify your review and your methodology in pay equity. And we have to do it regularly, right? Because you have to be recertified each year. And we'll make sure that you're doing your review in a manner that's consistent with the rules and standards. And we'll have a remediation plan for you, and we'll constantly check in. So that was really exciting for us, because that was something we really struggled with, is how do we talk about the work that we're doing without getting punished for it, right? It's great work that we're doing and we want to get it all out there, but it's certainly a sensitive topic. And that's something that we struggled with and we wanted to be cognizant of. So anyway, in September last year, we got certified in this space, and we'll continue to review our stuff frequently with them. So really exciting.
That's fantastic. I think there might be some follow-up questions from the panelists as well, but let's talk a little bit about it. How long did that whole process take, Kim?
So we took about a year to really perfect our methodology. That's not the certification piece. So the certification piece, once we said, hey, let's go do it, that maybe took a month. They make sure that they tap into the workspace that you're doing the review. And then we'll meet a couple times. They'll bring up questions that they have, and we'll walk them through, how our workforce is designed in that group or so on and so forth. But it was pretty quick.
Well, congratulations.
Myra, can I ask
sorry.
a question? Yeah.
Absolutely.
What was the
Go
hardest
ahead.
part about the certification? If you had to tell somebody else who was about to go do this, what would you want?
So this is something that I'm really thankful that we had in place already, but it was a solid kind of job architecture structure for our groups.
Yeah.
And so I will say that's something that, before you really embark on your certification, if you've been talking about redoing your job architecture, just go through that process first before you go down the pay equity review and certification. Because that really goes into how you structure your similarly situated groups and then how you control within those SSGs.
Yeah, I think there's, a lot of factors, aren't there, Kim, that you have to perfect or clean up. I think most people going, when you're doing the pay equity analysis in-house, obviously job groupings is a key one, and often data, because you might set out with the intentions, for example, to be able to do analysis across multiple protected categories, but you may not have that data. When we're working with clients on pay equity analysis, we always say you have to start your journey somewhere. So start with the data that you have. And then when you start communicating the outcomes, people will start to have more trust in, why you're doing this. And then they'll more willingly give data, that you require to potentially look at other protected categories. So I think, I think people always think, we can quickly do some pay equity analysis. This isn't a quick fix. This is a commitment that you make, and this is a journey that you take. And there's a lot of work that you need to do to get to the point where you can have, really impactful and effective analysis.
I agree, Ruth. And there's no destination, right? Like you guys aren't just going to get there in 3 years. Like it's just this never-ending journey to perfection, really. And it's important work that you do the whole time.
We have a follow-up, Kim, from the group. And thank you so much for sharing this information as well with us. The question is, where does American Airlines stand today for pay equity? Has the review been completed across the enterprise? When will the results of the review be seen?
That's a great question. We obviously we do this continually, and we do our review not only with the merit and pay plan cycle, but we also do it off cycle to make sure that we're staying on top of any drift. But in terms of any adjustments, we make sure we implement those whenever they come up. And so there, like I said, there's no destination. There's not a big reveal that'll say we're there, right? Because the pay equity review is only a point in time. And so as soon as you have a new hire come into the group, or, this group, we have a reorg and they're now reporting under commercial, the basis of the data is no longer the same, right? So there's no one big reveal where we share results.
Terrific. So we have a question coming through. Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing. And we will open it up now for general discussion and some follow-up questions as well. We have a question coming to us from the group regarding the unique factors that are specifically driving down the earning power for women of color. Who'd like to kick us off with some comments on that?
I think I'd go to your headline, which is one size does not fit all. So, like we say, women are a giant monolith, and there's not, you need to look in there. I think the same thing is true for women of color. That you can't not go to bias affects our representation in different work levels in all industries. You also look at advancement after that. So you're coming in and then you're going up. So there's the things that we've all come to know. Look at me, I'm old. This is not a new set of themes, guys. So there are similar themes. And then there's just purely being underrepresented in higher wage segments of our, let's go with women in STEM, right? So there's some of these things that, Pete's looking to blow the door off of over at Sage, but we got some room there. And I hope that isn't a glib response. That's just, one size is enough. That's what I would say.
Sure. Ruth, do you have some ideas or thoughts and data that support the unique factors that are maybe specifically affecting driving down women in color?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mim's point is absolutely spot on. One of the issues around understanding how to fix the problems around race and ethnicity gaps is that it's a very different experience for each group within that. And where we see organizations being more effective is where they actually start to focus on the inclusion and belonging aspect of the DE&IB acronym. And when you start to listen to employees from those different groups and understand what their experience is like in your organization, then you can really start to, come to grips with what the nuances are, what are the barriers, what that they experience from a from a hiring perspective, from a progression perspective, from every aspect of the talent life cycle, and that's where you can start to then, as an organization, potentially address those. So we do find actually listening to employees is a more effective way of identifying those nuances. So that might be through mentor programs, it might be through, particular groups that are set up for different race and ethnicity groups, but just, really listening to those different populations.
Terrific. Thank you. Yeah, that was great insight, Ruth. Thank you. We have a question now for the entire group. They really want us to share a little bit about all of your best practices, but how did you get started? What did the internal communication process look like? How did you get started? How did you gain alignment on some of these initiatives? Who wants to start?
I'll jump in. With certification, we were required to communicate that internally and externally. And so we did have something go out to all of our team members to say, we've done this review and we got certified in this space. But I think it's really important to have that alignment with your HR business partners, right? Because they're always talking to your business leaders. And so I think bringing them along for the journey is really key. And so it's not just briefing them once on what is pay equity and what are we doing, but it's this regular update of, hey, we did another analysis and this is what I want to show you. Or, we should really focus on the opportunity gap because it's not just pay equity, it's about representation too. Because if you don't have the right representation, you're going to have a huge gap on your uncontrolled pay gap. And so I think it's really just important to keep them along for the journey.
I think you have so powerfully stated this, the idea of making sure that we're talking about it. And I love that that American Airlines had figured out a safe way to do it. Kim, you went by that point earlier, but I'm guaranteed, we got 150 people here and that's a big deal that, being
Thanks,
able to say, yeah, you're working on it. It's very cool. Very cool. Sorry, Myra, I'll try to stop you.
You're doing great, man. Thanks. Peter, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about how you were able to get some of that alignment with all those initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think it also starts with leadership, right? You need to make sure that leadership is behind the initiatives. And I think that's really important. I also like what Kim said about HR business partners. I mean, at Sage, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? They're in with the managers and the leaders making decisions. And if you can provide them with the information, then they obviously are prepared to be able to have those conversations, right? Those tough conversations and work it, right? And so I think those are the two ways that, I think are really important to have if you're going to make any progress.
Thanks. That was terrific. Linda, there's a question for you just because yours is such a powerful piece that you introduced. How did you go about getting that type of alignment?
Happy to share. It actually has, I think the source will be the same. It needs to start with the leadership commitment. And it needs to be beyond compliance. It needs to be to the root of things. And you can imagine that at the beginning, people felt a little bit threatened, to be honest, because imagine as a people leader or as someone that is discussing a particular performance or a particular potential, now somebody's observing you. And so there is a lot of insecurity that could come from it. On the other side, it helps to come back and say, wait, but somebody will also be helping and being an ambassador for you whenever your people leader is discussing you. And so, okay, then I get the fear, but I get the benefit as well. And if we're able to place ourselves in that spot often enough, in whatever role we play, and say it's actually for the benefit of everyone that we work on this. That was a big part of the communication strategy for anything, because I just described that one, but of course we have a lot of other ways of reviewing and ensuring that the outcomes are equitable from a race and gender perspective, and to get to those moments in which you're very intimate, connected to the smallest of the beginning of the process, when you're talking about performance and reviewing. That ended up being the biggest, I would say, communication effort in the organization, because every people leader needed to be okay and comfortable with somebody listening to you whenever you are talking about someone. That was a big change.
And you said you observed one, right? Any takeaways that you saw from an observation standpoint and some of the ones that you observed?
At the end, everybody appreciates the ambassador. At the end. At the beginning, everybody is like, and who are you? Because you're not in HR. But I think at the end, everybody ends up having and this was multiple groups that I had a chance to facilitate. You feel actually relief, first of all, because if there was something that you could have, if there was a mistake that you probably could have made, or if you were expressing yourself not in the way that you were thinking, you feel relief that somebody gave you the chance to clarify. And if there were no issues with the way that you were expressing yourself, or even with your thoughts, you also find relief. So if you were invited to be better, or if you were okay, there is a sense of, okay, there is higher quality in the conversation that we just had, because we have somebody that is purposely taking care of this from that angle, and here to advocate for those that are not in the room.
That is fantastic, Linda. Thank you so much. We have a great question actually that came through in the initial registration as well as again, and that's really regarding the hybrid office positions and the remote environment, right? With multiple states. Maybe we could hear from you, Pete, and then Ruth. How are we looking at creative strategies on comp structure for those?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a real challenge. I don't know if we have the answer yet on it. I think it's still in process, but we have a national structure in terms of how we pay folks. And so we really try to work within that national structure. However, as people move in those really extremely highly paid areas like San Francisco Bay Area, or the really low areas like Salt Lake City or Tennessee, where there's really an extreme difference from the national average. In the past, we've always, differentiated locally based on those geographic differentiators, if you will. What's happening now is as people are moving around, right? If somebody moves from New York or Boston to a low-cost area, we have decided not to reduce people's pay, right? Even though that local market is probably paying less, all right? We just don't want to take the risk of losing really good people who just decide to work somewhere else. So it's a tough line to walk. What that also creates is, as we have more people moving around, we're going to have to do equity assessments, pay equity assessments in those geographies to make sure that if now there's inequities being created by that, it's going to put pressure on us to actually make adjustments to people that might have been there. So, and then when it comes to people that are moving to the high cost areas, what we're finding is that we have people that move there and then they say, oh, by the way, I can move, to XYZ company right here and increase my pay in San Francisco Bay Area by 15%. What are you going to do about it? And so we've been in a position of having to, thoughtfully make adjustments. We don't always just, it's not an automatic thing. We look at the job, we look at the local market data, and we make an intelligent decision. But we've had to make some adjustments with people that have moved in those areas to make sure that they're being paid competitively locally, or we will lose them. And so it's again, it's not, we don't have a perfect answer on it or a really a black box model that you can say, hey, this is what we do when somebody does that. It's really, we're handling these things as we go, but we're going to have to come up with some systemic, ways of dealing with this, the more and more experience we get with it.
I think it'll be interesting to follow Ruth at Payscale and sort of see how this begins to materialize, because I can envision, Pete, that there will be a homogenization among certain work segments, no matter where you're from. This is, it's sort of like I'm 1,000 years old and I remember the .com era. I know half of you don't know what that means, but where if you were in IT, it was like, forget it. As long as you had the letters I and T in your name, you got a 30% wage. We had two different bands. We had IT bands and for the rest of us.
Right.
So
That's absolutely true, man. You're right. It's homogenization. It's like everyone's going to end up being on more of a national, within a national band as everyone moves around, because everyone's going to just be moving to the middle. It won't matter where you are, right? So I agree with you. That's probably in the future for sure.
Yeah, and I think our research, we do some remote work pay research, and that reiterated exactly what you're doing, Peter, was that people are not reducing pay when people move out of, when they've moved to a remote location, when they move to a low cost area, which, as you say, again, will create pay equity issues. So I think as you create your remote work or your hybrid, pay strategies, you need to think constantly about how the pay equity angle plays out amongst that. And when you come up with your approaches, make sure that you administer them consistently, so there's not one exception that someone's getting, keeping their high cost element compared to others. But it does bring up an interesting kind of ethical debate around, should it matter where you are if you all contribute the same value to an organization? And that was being talked about pre-pandemic. Doesn't matter where you are, and everything that we've seen that's happened, and the experiences we've lived over the last 24 months is kind of now bringing that home to roost almost.
It does speak to that whole gender piece too, as well, right? Is it the role? Is it the person, right? Based on how you're going to pay. So Ruth, we do have a specific question though for you. Any insight on what countries are doing really well in narrowing the pay gap, and how are they getting it done?
Yeah, I saw that question come in too. I mean, I think pre-pandemic, the countries that were having the most effect, having the most impact in terms of closing their pay gaps, were those that had the most rigorous reporting regimes. Unfortunately, as much as that will make us all feel very uncomfortable. So, Iceland was always the poster child. It started pay equity legislation first in Europe, and they had a very rigorous reporting regime. In the UK, where I'm currently based, we've had the public reporting regime in place. It was put on hold during the pandemic. We were seeing the gender pay gap closing only by kind of like 1 or 2% annually, but just that public reporting regime was pushing action from companies in order, because the information was out there in the public domain. So it'll be interesting how that plays out relative to the proposed Californian legislation, where companies may have to publish their median pay for roles. We may start to see that regime taking place in that state. So I think public reporting is the key here.
There is a follow-up question regarding that in the topic of visibility and trust, right? Are organizations publishing your pay information to the staff to see now, or do you see them sharing more of that information as work and impact expectations regarding compensation changes? Kim, what are your thoughts?
So I think that's how we all get there, right? Is through pay transparency. American had their general range posted, and the challenge when you do that and when you have as many ranges as we do is the confusion, right? And so it's important to just educate folks on what range is theirs versus others and how we determine that. So I honestly don't think we've cracked the nut on that one, and we've certainly made it a priority for ourselves this year to really work on pay transparency. So I think it's really important, but I don't have the solutions.
Yeah, I would add to that, Kim. You really have to have it educate the workforce on how your comp system really works before that's going to be able to be
Yeah.
done effectively. I mean, the other thing that happens sometimes is, you know, when you put out a median or a mean, everyone thinks they need to be at that median or mean. If they're not at that median or mean or higher, then there's a problem, right? And as we all know, you know, there's a range, right? And it depends on where you are in that range in terms of performance, your skills and knowledge. And so, you know, obviously, when you're still formulating and developing a mastery of the competencies required and skills required for that job, you're going to be lower in the range, right? But all that kind of education before you're in a position, I think, to be able to be more transparent, you need to build a real, you know, understanding and communication of plans so that people really understand how these decisions are made, right? It's critical.
It is.
Personally think you've got to do an amazing amount of work with the managers. Like I run employee benefits for Hub International when I'm not talking about the Boston Women's Workforce Council. So I'm a line leader, and I know that everything you and Kim are talking about is impossible without a management team, a manager schema who can handle these conversations. Otherwise, the tires come off the car, no matter what you're trying to do.
Mim, that's terrific. That's one of the questions is how do you explain it to someone, you know, in California that they'll be paid the same as a person in Tennessee or vice versa? And you're saying it starts mostly with the leadership or the managers?
Yeah, well, I think Kim and Peter are laying out, you know, back by Ruth's data that this is part, like the architecture is putting the information together. But I would say in order to bring it to life, and that there's nothing that everybody watching this doesn't know, you turn around to hand this to a line manager and they're like, goink, 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 goink. They have no idea what to do. So, you know, as talented as my HR peers can possibly be, you're stuck with me on the other side. And if I don't know what I'm doing, then we're not going to be able to do it. So, sorry.
So I did want to chime in with something we did in 2019. And obviously this is pre-pandemic, and we were talking about all the changes that the pandemic brought to us. But in 2019, when we were communicating what our manager and above bonus program and structure looked like, we also baked in this element of compensation education. It's Comp 101 and what is our comp philosophy. So, I mean, we hit the road and we hit all of our hubs to really talk to frontline leaders and managers of people about, well, one, what does your bonus structure look like? But two, like, what is our comp philosophy and how do you play a part in that? And so, you know, things changed during the pandemics, but that is something that I'd like to pick up as we return to normalcy, is really educating people on this broader kind of total rewards spectrum that we're on. Because now it's not just about base pay now, right? Especially in this, can I call it post-pandemic world, where we're talking about, you know, like, what does your benefits look like? What are about the flexibility? I mean, you know, childcare, all these other things that now come into play for us.
Thanks for that reminder, Kim. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about total rewards. Any insight or best practices around total rewards? Great reminder, Kim. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it is, you're absolutely right there, Kim, because if you think about the employee experience during the pandemic and how, you know, some of those non-cash benefits became really important during that phase, you know, health benefits, you know, how you were helping employees with hazardous environments, you know, all the types of benefits that you were being able to offer employees. And I think, you know, that's kind of a reevaluation now. We need to think about what are the things that employees are valuing the most now, and really listening to their employees so that you can really focus, you know, where you do your compensation spend, for example. I mean, we've talked a lot about the Great Resignation, the Great Reevaluation, the talent crisis that we're in, and we've talked about pay, but there are a lot of other reasons why employees are leaving organizations right at this time, and it's not all about pay. So.
To me, I think it is a need that we need to go back to have opportunities to pulse very frequently. And I think it's true whenever you're publishing your outcomes, if you do, after you make reviews, whenever you are educating people around your compensation philosophy, that's coming from the company to you. I think it's very valuable that we use and create even more channels to hear back, because that is the feedback loop that it's going to be needed to really make sure that you're adjusting the investments in whatever program that you're putting together, and that you're getting the actual experience up. because otherwise it's a misalignment between what you want to be investing on and what the perception is. In our case, we have quarterly touch points and we have particular topics each of those quarters, but there are always questions around compensation, benefits, etc. And some opportunities during the year to double click, as well as opportunities everywhere as it relates to each of the programs that we have to provide that individual feedback, because compensation and total rewards really end up being extremely personal. And so as long as that feedback loop is open, I think that we'll have a greater chance of making the best decisions there.
That's a really good point, Linda, because I think the most valuable feedback was when you got it directly from folks, and call it anecdotal, right? It's not a survey where we roll it up and look at the stats and the percentage, but like that person to person feedback is so valuable, especially if it's repeated. Like during your sessions, if you start to hear the same things, like that's no longer anecdotal, right? Like this is something we need to action on. So that's really important. That's awesome that you guys do that.
There was a follow-up, Linda, to that, and this is to the group, of course, but what happens in those reviews when you do capture the inequities within a department? How is that then the discrepancy addressed? Who would like to share an example?
I was going to be a wise guy and say there's public floggings, but I didn't think that sounded right. Sorry, Linda. There goes. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think at Sage, what we do is we involve the HR business partners. If there are things that we see that are happening as we're going through these processes, we flag them and then they get worked real time, right? So if it looks like there's an inequity, a difference that there's no rationale for it, then we go and we do a deep dive on that individual situation and we research it to see if there's a reason. If there's not, then we correct.
Pete, I had one Boston Women Workforce Council member who shared that she went marching in, and I mean that in a nice way, like into her CEO's office, is like, dude, we got a problem. It was a dude. And they laid out a multi-year plan. So to your point, if you can get a seat at the table where you're really talking to the management team, the senior leadership team as the HR executive. And then as Linda and Kim both noted, wage is part of this. Look at the entire employee experience and see what levers you got in there. I think there are two things you could potentially think about, Myra.
Well, we are almost at our time. And so I thought we could just round robin any last thought, but Mim, I'm going to take yours. And it's one size does not fit all. So that's a big part of what I walked away with today. Who'd like to go next with their closing piece?
I think this group shows you the importance of the HR network and making sure that you've got a good kitchen cabinet of leaders who can help you bounce ideas off. This is a really great start to that.
Love it.
To me, we need to take a look at everything, because pay ends up being also a function of the experiences, of the development, of the opportunities. It's the entire thing that we need to make sure that is equitable and that is giving us the outcomes that are fair.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that when you're doing this well, your organization is going to be healthier and is going to perform better. And you just need to believe. If you believe that, then the rest is, you'll get through the rest. And I think at Sage, that's our position on it. We really believe it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important to just go do it. If you and your leadership have been talking about it for a while, like it's time. It's time if you haven't done it. Obviously, you need to be thoughtful about how you go out and do it, but it's really important to do it now too, right? Because and I'm speaking from experience. We did reviews for several years trying to perfect how we wanted to do it. And really it's really important work. So as soon as you can get your results and kind of action on any results, now's the time.
Yeah, because it's really a question of authenticity and trust, and the how your employees feel about how they're being treated. And so, you have to be authentic with them as well and say, we are not going to fix this in 6 months. We're not going to fix this in 12 months, but we are going to start the process of understanding, what is going on in our organization. And if you can approach it with that authenticity, then that's a great place to start.
I want to thank all of you. This was terrific. Thanks for those closing comments. This panelist has been a fantastic, what a terrific discussion. As a reminder for all the individuals that joined, you will receive an email with a link in the recording. And thank you, Ruth, for sharing your resources as well. We're super excited about that again. And this was a very important topic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.